At the family dinner, my dad sneered, "You have 24 hours to evict yourself." "Donovan needs it." I didn't panic, just smiled and prepared. 24 hours later, they lost absolutely everything. I am Valerie, 30 years old, and an interior designer living in the quiet, scenic town of Missoula, Montana. If you had asked me a week ago to describe my life, I would have told you it was exhausting but stable. I spent my days picking out color palettes for clients, and my nights trying to keep my own family from falling apart. But everything shattered on a mundane Friday night. The family dinner started like any other. The dining room was filled with the smell of my mom's roasted chicken, a recipe she had perfected over the decades. The sound of silverware clinking against porcelain plates echoed under the warm glow of the modern chandelier, a chandelier I had bought and installed myself just last summer to replace the flickering, hazardous fixture from my childhood. I was in the middle of a story, laughing slightly as I told my parents, Richard and Nancy, about a client who insisted on putting a velvet sofa in a toddler's playroom. I expected a chuckle, maybe a polite nod. Instead, the room went dead silent. My dad, Richard, stopped cutting his meat. He placed his knife and fork down deliberately, the metal making a sharp, final sound against the plate. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. His lips curled upward into a slow, calculated sneer. It was a look of pure disdain, one you might give a stranger who had overstayed their welcome, not your only daughter. "You have 24 hours to evict yourself," he said. His voice wasn't loud. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quiet authority in his tone cut through the air like a blade. "The house belongs to Donovan now. He needs it more than you do. Have your bags packed by tomorrow evening." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out through the air conditioning vents. I blinked, my mind racing to process the words. 24 hours? Evict myself? Donovan, my older brother, who had been chasing imaginary millions in New York for the past 5 years, hadn't set foot in this house, let alone this state, in ages. I slowly turned my gaze to my mother, Nancy. She was suddenly deeply fascinated by her mashed potatoes, refusing to make eye contact with me. She fidgeted with her napkin, her silence screaming volumes. She was in on it. They had planned this ambush. They sat there, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to remind them of everything I had done to keep a roof over their heads. They expected a breakdown. But as I sat there, tracing the smooth wood grain of the dining table with my thumb, a table I had spent 3 weekends sanding and refinishing by hand, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, chaotic break. It was a quiet, cold locking of a door. The panic they wanted to see never materialized. The tears they expected didn't come. My stomach churned with a toxic mix of betrayal and disbelief, but I forced my muscles to relax. I set my fork down next to my plate, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and looked right back into my father's sneering face. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just gave them a tight, closed-mouth smile, pushed my chair back, and stood up. They had no idea that their 24-hour countdown wouldn't end with my homelessness, but with their absolute ruin. To understand the sheer audacity of my father's ultimatum, you have to understand the ghosts that haunted our halls, my older brother, Donovan. Donovan is 33. But in my parents' eyes, he has never aged past the glory days of being a high school varsity quarterback. Growing up, our house was a shrine to his mediocrity. His participation trophies were polished weekly, while my straight-A report cards were briefly glanced at before being tossed into the junk drawer. Donovan was the undisputed golden boy. He never had to mow the lawn, wash a dish, or take out the trash. Whenever there was a chore to be done, my mother would look at me with that tired, pleading expression and say, "Valerie, be a good girl and do it. Your brother needs to focus on his future." So, I became the built-in maid, the silent fixer who patched the holes in the drywall Donovan punched when his team lost, the one who cleaned the kitchen while he slept in until noon. 5 years ago, Donovan packed 2 designer suitcases he bought on credit and announced he was moving to New York to conquer Wall Street. He had no finance degree, no job lined up, just a dangerous amount of unearned confidence and a smile that could talk my parents out of their retirement funds. For years, he was a phantom. He called maybe twice a year, usually on holidays, talking a million miles a minute about imaginary hedge funds, penthouse parties, and deals that were always just about to close. It was all a mirage, a pathetic illusion built on lies, but my parents ate it up. They worshipped the ground he supposedly walked on in Manhattan. I would be out on our front porch in the blistering July heat, my hands blistered from replacing the rotted wooden floorboards myself, and I would hear my mother through the screen door, bragging to Sylvia, our neighbor. "Oh, yes, Donovan is closing a multi-million-dollar merger," she would lie effortlessly. "He's just so successful, we barely see him." Meanwhile, I was the one keeping their lights on. I was the one paying the water bill when Richard's pension fell short. I was the invisible safety net they walked all over while staring at the stars Donovan painted in the sky. 6 months ago, the golden boy's illusion shattered. He returned to Missoula with his tail between his legs. The penthouse was a lie. He had been living in a cramped apartment with 4 roommates, swimming in credit card debt, and had recently been fired from a mid-level sales job. But did my parents see him for the failure he was? Of course not. To them, the harsh, cruel world of New York had chewed up their brilliant son. They coddled him, making excuses for his return. He hadn't moved back into the house yet, opting to crash on a friend's couch across town while he figured things out. Now I knew what he was figuring out. He was waiting for my parents to clear the runway. He was waiting for them to throw me out like a bag of old clothes so he could waltz in and claim the castle I had kept from crumbling. The most twisted part of my father's sneer wasn't just that he was giving my room to Donovan. It was that he was giving away a house that legally, morally, and financially I had saved from the auction block. Let me take you back 3 years, to the dark, suffocating winter of 2023. My parents had always been terrible with money, treating credit limits like free cash. It caught up to them. The bank sent a notice of foreclosure. They were drowning in $60,000 of debt they couldn't pay, and the bank was threatening to take the house, the very house I grew up in. I remember Richard sitting at the dining table, his head buried in his hands, defeated. Nancy was crying softly by the sink. They called Donovan, begging for a loan. The golden boy didn't even pick up the phone. His voicemail box was full. I was 27 at the time, grinding my way up in the interior design world. I was working 80-hour weeks, taking on every stressful, high-maintenance freelance gig I could find. I was surviving on cheap ramen and instant coffee, ruining my physical health, all because I had a dream. I had saved exactly $60,000. It was supposed to be the down payment for my own house, my escape ticket to a life of my own. But the family guilt is a powerful, venomous thing. When I saw my parents weeping, terrified of becoming homeless, the ingrained habit of being the fixer took over. I couldn't let them sleep on the street. I went to the bank and transferred every single penny I had to clear their debt. The bank took the $60,000, the foreclosure was halted, and the house was saved. My parents hugged me, crying, calling me their angel. But I wasn't entirely stupid. Even through the fog of family loyalty, a tiny voice of self-preservation had whispered to me. Before I handed over the money, I made a demand. I told Richard that if I paid off the debt, my name had to go on the deed. I needed to be listed as a co-owner to protect my investment. Richard had sighed heavily, looking almost offended that I didn't just give it to them as a gift, but he had no choice. He agreed. The paperwork was filed. For a few months, the gratitude was real. But as the fear of homelessness faded, so did their appreciation. I went back to being the invisible daughter. I spent the next 3 years pouring more of my sweat into the property. I bought new appliances when the old ones died. I painted the walls, fixed the plumbing, and transformed a decaying structure into a beautiful, modern home. I sacrificed my own independence to rebuild theirs. And now, sitting at that dining table, looking at my father's sneer, I realized the ultimate truth. They didn't see my sacrifice as a gift. They saw it as their right. And worse, they actually believed they had the power to throw a co-owner out on the street to make room for their precious, bankrupt son. It was 11 p.m. on Friday night. The house was completely silent, the kind of heavy, oppressive silence that follows a disaster. I was pacing the length of my bedroom, the hardwood floor cold against my bare feet. The 24-hour countdown was ticking in my head. 14 hours left. My mind was a chaotic storm of anger and confusion. I kept replaying my father's words. The house belongs to Donovan now. How? How could it belong to him? I was on the deed. They couldn't just kick me out. Unable to stand the isolation, I grabbed my phone and dialed Monica. Monica wasn't just my best friend. She was a ruthless, brilliant corporate lawyer who viewed the world through a lens of contracts and liabilities. She answered on the second ring, her voice raspy from sleep, but immediately sharpening when she heard my shaky breathing. I put her on speakerphone, tossed the phone onto my bed, and spilled everything. I told her about the dinner, the sneer, the ultimatum, and Donovan's pathetic return to Missoula. I walked her through the logic that was breaking my brain. Monica, it doesn't make any sense, I whispered, terrified my parents would hear me through the drywall. I paid the $60,000 3 years ago. My name is on the house. Donovan is flat broke. He was washing cars for tips last month. How can they just hand him a house? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of Monica's brain working, assembling the pieces of a puzzle I couldn't see. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely devoid of sympathy, replaced by a chilling, clinical focus. Valerie, listen to me very carefully, Monica said, her tone dead serious. People like your parents don't make grand, aggressive moves unless they have a safety net or a secret. Why would they kick you out right now? Why the sudden rush of a 24-hour notice? They want you gone before you notice something. Notice what? I asked, stopping my pacing. Money, she replied flatly. Donovan comes back broke. 6 months later, he suddenly has a house waiting for him? They found money somewhere, Val. And given that they have terrible credit and no savings, there is only one asset they could leverage. The house. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. But they can't, I protested. I'm a co-owner. They can't take out a second mortgage or a home equity loan without my signature. The bank would require all owners to sign off. Exactly, Monica said softly. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Check the documents, Valerie. Check their files. Find out what they've been doing while you were busy picking out curtains. Do it tonight. The clock on my nightstand read 2 a.m. The house was pitch black. My parents were heavy sleepers, their snores echoing faintly from down the hall. I slipped out of my room, holding a small flashlight, and crept toward the narrow, creaky pull-down stairs that led to the attic. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a loud, frantic rhythm that felt like it would wake the entire neighborhood. The attic was sweltering, even in the middle of a Montana night. It smelled of old pine, trapped heat, and years of accumulated dust. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the chaotic mess of cardboard boxes, forgotten winter coats, and plastic bins filled with cheap Christmas decorations. My parents were hoarders of paperwork. They kept every receipt and utility bill for decades, mostly out of paranoia. I began a methodical search, moving like a ghost. I started with the boxes labeled with recent years. I dug through piles of mundane grocery receipts, expired coupons, and junk mail. My knees ached against the hard wooden beams, and sweat dripped down my back, making my shirt cling to my skin. After 45 minutes of suffocating heat and dead ends, I was about to give up, thinking Monica's paranoia had infected me. Then, tucked underneath a heavy box of old photo albums in the darkest corner of the attic, I spotted it. An unmarked, thick manila envelope. It didn't belong with the neatly labeled tax returns. It looked hidden. Intentional. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. I clicked the flashlight to a brighter setting and opened the flap. Inside was a stack of official-looking bank correspondence. I pulled out the top sheet. It was a late payment warning from the bank, dated just 2 weeks ago. My eyes scanned the text, struggling to focus in the dim light. It referenced a newly opened home equity line of credit. The balance was exactly $60,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. Monica was right. They had borrowed against the house. But as I flipped through the papers, panic began to rise. These were just billing statements and warning letters addressed to my parents. The actual loan agreement, the contract that would show who authorized this massive debt, was missing from the envelope. Someone had deliberately separated it. But the statements were enough to confirm the nightmare. 6 months ago, right around the time Donovan slithered back into town claiming he needed a fresh start, my parents had secretly chained a massive debt to the property. A debt that, as a co-owner, I would ultimately be responsible for if they defaulted. And they were already missing payments. I sat in the dust, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, realizing that my family hadn't just betrayed me, they had sold me out. Saturday morning arrived with the pale, unforgiving light of dawn. I hadn't slept a single minute. At exactly 8 a.m., I was sitting in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel, dialing Gavin's number. Gavin was an old client of mine. I had completely redesigned the lobby of the local bank branch he managed, and we had stayed on friendly terms. I knew he was working the Saturday morning shift today. He answered with a cheerful greeting, which I immediately cut through. "Gavin, it's Valerie. I have an absolute emergency and I need a massive favor." I explained that I needed a digital copy of the loan agreement tied to my property address. I told him I was a co-owner and had a legal right to see it, masking the sheer panic in my voice with forced professionalism. Gavin hesitated, noting that it was highly unusual to bypass the standard request channels, but the desperation in my voice convinced him. He promised to pull the file from the digital archives and send it over via a secure, encrypted email. I went back inside the house, poured a cup of coffee that tasted like hot ash, and stared at my laptop screen. My parents were awake now, moving about the kitchen, ignoring my presence completely, acting as if I was already a ghost. At 9:30 a.m., the email arrived. My mouse clicked the PDF attachment. The document loaded on my screen, a standard home equity loan agreement for $60,000, approved 6 months ago. My eyes darted past the dense legal jargon, scrolling furiously to the final page. The signature page. There it was. Richard's signature. Nancy's signature. And right below them, on the line designated for the primary cosigner, was my name. Valerie Hayes. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was my name, but it wasn't my hand. The person who signed it had tried to mimic my cursive, but they had failed miserably. The loop on the V was far too sharp, lacking my usual fluid curve. The tail of the Y at the end was completely wrong, jagged and rushed. It was a forgery. A clumsy, desperate forgery. The pieces slammed together with sickening clarity. Donovan needed money to pay off his New York debts and secure a life here. My parents, entirely broke, wanted to give him the world. But they couldn't mortgage the house because my name was on the deed. So, they bypassed me entirely. They forged my signature, committed massive financial fraud, took the $60,000, and handed it to their golden boy. And now that the money was gone and the bank was sending late notices, they needed to kick me out, sell the house from under me, or force me to pay the debt when the bank came knocking. The sadness I had felt the night before evaporated instantly. It was burned away by a cold, searing rage. This wasn't just a toxic family dynamic anymore. This was a felony. It was identity theft. It was wire fraud. They had stolen my past, and now they were trying to steal my future. I looked up from the screen, staring at the closed door of my bedroom. They gave me 24 hours to leave. They thought I would pack a suitcase and cry my way to a motel. I slowly closed my laptop, a genuinely terrifying smile spreading across my face. They wanted me out? Fine. I would leave. But I was taking absolutely everything with me. Thank you for watching until the end. Please help spread the video to more viewers by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and especially leaving a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment is a huge motivation for the channel. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for the extremely intense revenge in the next part. The tears that had been threatening to spill over earlier were completely gone, evaporated by a cold, searing rage that settled deep in my chest. I didn't feel like crying anymore. I felt like calculating. I walked into my bedroom, pulled out a thick yellow legal pad from my desk drawer, and clicked my pen. They wanted me out of the house in 24 hours? Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would remove myself. But I was going to remove every single trace of my financial contribution to this family along with me. I started in the living room. I stood in the center of the space, letting my eyes wander over the cozy, modern aesthetic I had painstakingly built. I wrote down the first item, the $2,000 gray sectional sofa. I remembered the exact weekend I bought it. I had just finished a brutal 2-month commercial design project, working until midnight every day. I had taken my bonus and bought that sofa so my father, Richard, could have a comfortable place to watch his Sunday football games, because his old recliner was destroying his back. I remembered hauling it inside with the delivery guys, my muscles aching. Beside it on my list went the $1,500 smart television mounted on the wall. I had bought that for my mother, Nancy, so she could stream her favorite cooking shows in high definition. I moved to the dining room. I looked up at the sleek, brushed nickel chandelier hanging above the table. It had cost me $800 and a weekend of dodging sparks and blown fuses to install it. I wrote it down. Next came the custom navy blue curtains that framed the bay windows, another $600. I walked into the kitchen and added the stainless steel microwave and the expensive espresso machine I had purchased last Christmas. Down the hall, I pushed open the door to the laundry room. The heavy-duty washer and dryer combo sat there, humming quietly. I had spent $2,500 on that set when the old one flooded the basement 2 years ago. My parents hadn't paid a dime toward it. They just complained about the noise until I bought the quietest models on the market. I added them to the yellow notepad. I went room by room, my pen scratching aggressively against the paper. I listed the expensive area rugs, the patio furniture I had bought for their summer barbecues, the hallway mirrors, the guest room mattress, and every piece of art hanging on the walls. The house was a museum of my sacrifices, a gallery of my exhausted paychecks. For 3 years, I had poured my soul into making this place a home, believing that I was securing a sanctuary for my family. Now, looking at the long, multi-page list in my hand, I saw it for what it truly was, a catalog of stolen labor. Every item was a receipt of my misplaced loyalty. They had forged my name to steal $60,000, and now they wanted to steal the very comfort I had provided them to hand it over to Donovan. I tore the pages from the legal pad, folded them neatly, and put them in my pocket. The inventory of betrayal was complete. It was time to clear out. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. The clock was ticking down, and I had a massive logistical nightmare to solve. I opened my laptop and searched for the highest-rated moving companies in Missoula. I needed an army, and I needed it immediately. I found a company called Missoula Movers that advertised emergency, same-day service for premium rates. I dialed the number, my voice completely steady, devoid of any panic. A dispatcher answered. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him I needed their biggest truck and a 3-man crew at my address by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no exceptions. I rattled off the inventory list: a massive sectional sofa, large appliances, heavy wooden furniture, fragile electronics, and dozens of boxes. The dispatcher paused, likely calculating the sheer volume of the request on such short notice. He quoted me an astronomical emergency fee, nearly $2,000 for the rush job. I pulled out my credit card without a second thought and read him the numbers. Money wasn't the issue today. Time and vengeance were. Just as I hung up the phone, a soft knock echoed from the front door. I opened it to find Sylvia, our next-door neighbor, standing on the porch holding a plate of warm blueberry muffins. Sylvia was a sweet, observant woman in her late 60s who had lived in the neighborhood longer than we had. She always had a kind word for me, and she noticed things my parents purposely ignored. Valerie, honey, I saw you pacing past the windows this morning. You looked terribly upset, Sylvia said, her brow furrowed in genuine concern. She handed me the plate. I baked these earlier. Is everything all right? I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I didn't want to air out the felony fraud charges just yet. That was a card I was holding close to my chest, but I needed an ally. I took a deep breath. Richard and Nancy told me last night that I have 24 hours to move out, I said, keeping my voice remarkably calm. They're giving the house to Donovan. Sylvia's jaw physically dropped. Her eyes widened behind her wire-rimmed glasses. What on earth? Giving it to Donovan? That boy hasn't lifted a finger for this property in his entire life. After everything you've done. She pointed a trembling finger at the freshly painted porch railing. I watched you sand and paint this porch in the blistering July heat while your father sat inside drinking iced tea. I saw you carry bags of cement for the garden wall. You saved them from foreclosure, Valerie. Everyone on this street knows it, no matter what your mother tries to spin at her book club. Hearing the validation from a third party, someone outside the toxic bubble of my family, was like a cool drink of water in a desert. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. The community saw the truth. Thank you, Sylvia. I smiled genuinely for the first time that day. It's okay, really. I'm moving out today. I have a crew coming at 2 o'clock. I'm taking everything I bought. Sylvia's shocked expression slowly melted into a wide, approving grin. She patted my arm firmly. Good for you, sweetheart. You take every last spoon you paid for. If you need any help packing, or if you just want to sit on my porch and watch the show, you let me know. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the deep rumble of a massive diesel engine shook the driveway. I stepped out onto the porch to see a huge white box truck with Missoula movers painted on the side shifting into park. 3 burly, professional-looking guys jumped out, adjusting their back braces and carrying thick moving blankets. I met the crew boss, a tall guy with a clipboard, and handed him my yellow notepad list. Everything on this list goes into the truck, I instructed him, my voice carrying the authority of an orchestra conductor about to start a symphony. If it's not on the list, do not touch it. I want the appliances unhooked, the televisions unmounted, the curtains taken down, and the rugs rolled up. We are stripping the meat off the bones of this house. The crew boss raised an eyebrow at my intense phrasing but nodded professionally. They got to work immediately, and what followed was a highly efficient, beautiful destruction of my parents' comfortable reality. I stood in the hallway, sipping a cold bottle of water, watching the great dismantling unfold. First went the living room. 2 men hoisted the heavy gray sectional sofa, maneuvering it through the front door. Without it, the room suddenly looked cavernous and empty. Another guy was on a ladder, using a power drill to unmount the $1,500 television. When he pulled the bracket off, it left a clean, bright square of paint on a wall that had otherwise gathered dust. They rolled up the thick Persian area rug, exposing the bare, scuffed hardwood floors that I had spent days polishing. Next, they tackled the dining room. I watched as the crystal and brushed nickel chandelier was carefully lowered, boxed, and carried away. The room was plunged into shadows, lit only by the harsh afternoon sun streaming through the windows that were now completely bare because the navy blue custom curtains had been folded and packed. The loudest part of the operation was the laundry room. The grunting of the movers echoed through the house as they disconnected the water lines and hauled the heavy washer and dryer combo out the back door on a hand truck. The hollow metallic thud sounded like a death knell for my family's convenience. For 3 solid hours, the house was a whirlwind of heavy footsteps, ripping packing tape, and shouted instructions. Box by box, piece of furniture by piece of furniture, the comfort of the house was systematically erased. Every time a mover carried an item past me, I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders. I was unburdening myself. I was reclaiming my sweat, my overtime hours, and my sanity. By 5 o'clock in the evening, the truck was fully loaded. The crew boss handed me the clipboard to sign. I tipped them generously in cash, thanked them, and watched the massive truck rumble down the street, taking my past with it. I walked back inside and closed the front door. The house was completely unrecognizable. Our footsteps echoed loudly against the bare walls and empty floors. There was no place to sit. There was no television to watch. There was no comfortable lighting. It was just an empty, echoing shell. It was exactly what my family deserved. The silence inside the house was absolute. It was 5:30 in the evening. I was standing in the center of the barren living room, holding nothing but a slim manila folder containing the forged loan documents and the bank correspondence. The walls looked naked, the floors looked cold, and the entire atmosphere of the house had shifted from a warm, inviting home to an abandoned, foreclosed property. I leaned against the kitchen counter, one of the few things I couldn't unbolt and take with me, and waited. At exactly 5:45, I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. A sleek, overpriced rideshare car pulled up. Out stepped Donovan, the golden boy himself. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit that he undoubtedly bought on a credit card he couldn't pay off, and he hauled a massive, flashy designer suitcase out of the trunk. He tipped the driver with an arrogant flick of his wrist, adjusted his expensive sunglasses, and walked up the front steps like a conquering king returning to his castle. I heard the key turn in the lock. The front door swung open. Donovan stepped inside, dropping his heavy suitcase onto the bare hardwood floor with a loud, echoing thud. He let out a loud, theatrical sigh. Finally, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. God, I need a drink and a nap on that giant sofa. He took 3 steps into the living room before his brain caught up with his eyes. He stopped dead in his tracks. The designer sunglasses slipped slightly down his nose. He blinked once, twice, looking around the completely empty space. He looked at the bare wall where the television used to be. He looked at the curtainless windows. He looked at the dining room, missing its table, its chairs, and its chandelier. His smug, arrogant expression slowly melted into a mask of utter, profound confusion. It was like watching a computer system crash and try to reboot in real time. He turned his head slowly, scanning the desolate rooms, until his eyes finally landed on me, standing quietly by the kitchen counter with my arms crossed and a serene smile on my face. "Valerie," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly, completely losing its practiced, deep timbre. He pointed a trembling finger at the empty air. Where the hell is the furniture? Where is the TV? Did we get robbed?" I let out a short, dry laugh. It echoed loudly in the empty house. "No, Donovan. We didn't get robbed," I said, my voice completely level. "The house isn't robbed. It's just reflecting the reality of its new owner. You." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He took a step toward me, his confusion rapidly morphing into the defensive anger of a narcissist who realizes things aren't going his way. "What did you do, Valerie? Dad said you had 24 hours to leave. He said the house was mine. What did you do with my stuff?" "Your stuff?" I challenged, pushing off the counter and taking a slow step toward him. "Not a single fiber in this house belonged to you. I took the sofa I paid for. I took the television I bought. I took the appliances, the rugs, the curtains, and the dining room table. I took exactly what I earned with my own blood and sweat while you were playing pretend in New York. You wanted the house, Donovan? You got it. It's all yours. Enjoy the floor." The reality of the situation finally hit him, and the explosion was immediate. Donovan's face turned a violent shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged as he threw his expensive sunglasses onto the floor, completely abandoning his cool, Wall Street persona. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us, his fists clenched at his sides. "You spiteful, jealous little witch," he screamed, his voice echoing painfully off the bare walls. "You couldn't just leave, could you? You had to ruin it. You've always been jealous of me. You've always been a pathetic loser who can't stand that Mom and Dad love me more. Put it back. Call the movers right now and put my furniture back." He was using the exact same gaslighting tactics he had used since we were children. Scream loud enough, make it my fault, call me jealous, and expect me to cower. But I wasn't 10 years old anymore, and I wasn't intimidated by a grown man throwing a toddler's temper tantrum. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, looking at him with nothing but absolute disgust. "I'm not calling anyone, Donovan," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "You have nothing. You are nothing. You're 33 years old, completely broke, and you came crawling back here expecting to steal the home I saved. You're pathetic." He raised his hand, pointing his finger inches from my face, his breathing heavy and ragged. "I'm going to call the police," he spat, saliva flying from his lips. "I'm going to have you arrested for theft. This is my house. Dad gave it to me." Before I could respond, the heavy sound of work boots stomping onto the wooden porch interrupted us. The open front door was suddenly filled by the massive frame of Walter, our neighbor from 2 houses down. Walter was a retired mechanic, a burly man with thick arms, a graying beard, and a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. He had clearly heard Donovan's hysterical screaming through the open door and had walked over. Walter stepped into the hallway, his thumbs hooked casually into the pockets of his denim jeans. He didn't look at me. He locked his hard, cold eyes entirely on Donovan. "Is there a problem over here, Valerie?" Walter asked in a deep, gravelly voice. I could hear this voice screaming all the way from my garage. Donovan spun around, trying to puff out his chest to look intimidating, but next to Walter, he looked like a panicked child wearing his father's suit. "This is none of your business, old man," Donovan barked, trying to regain his authority. "Get off my property before I call the cops on you too." Walter didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just took one slow, deliberate step closer to Donovan, completely invading his personal space. "I suggest you lower your voice, son," Walter growled softly. "I've watched this young woman bust her back keeping this property together for years. I know what she bought. I know what she built. And if you think you're gonna stand here and threaten her, you're gonna have to go through me first. Do we have an understanding?" Donovan's bravado instantly shattered. He took a step back, suddenly realizing he was outmatched physically and morally. He swallowed hard, the anger draining from his face, replaced by a nervous, twitching cowardice. He looked back at me, his eyes darting frantically. "Fine. Fine. I'm calling Dad. He's going to sue you for everything you're worth, Valerie." "Call him," I said, a cruel, triumphant smile finally breaking across my face. "Call Richard. Put him on speakerphone. In fact, you're going to want him to hear this." Donovan glared at me, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled his sleek smartphone from his pocket. He was trying to maintain a facade of control, but the presence of Walter silently judging him from the doorway had rattled him completely. He tapped the screen and held the phone up. It rang twice before my father answered. "Donovan? Are you at the house? Is that ungrateful sister of yours gone yet?" Richard's voice blared aggressively through the speaker, dripping with the same sneering arrogance he had used at dinner the night before. I didn't let Donovan speak. I stepped forward, holding up the manila folder. "I'm right here, Richard," I called out loudly so the phone would pick up my voice clearly. "And yes, I'm leaving. But before I go, I wanted to talk to both of you about a specific document I received from the bank this morning." The line went dead silent. Even through the phone, I could feel the sudden, terrifying drop in the room's temperature. I opened the folder and pulled out the crisp, printed pages of the loan agreement. I held it up so Donovan could see it, tapping my finger directly on the signature line. "I had a lovely chat with Gavin down at the branch today," I continued, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "He sent me the paperwork for the new $60,000 home equity line of credit you took out 6 months ago. You know, the money you used to pay off Donovan's embarrassing New York debts." Donovan's eyes widened. He stared at the piece of paper in my hand as if it were a live grenade. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale white. "Valerie, Richard started to stammer through the phone, his arrogant tone instantly vanishing, replaced by a high-pitched panic. "Shut up, Richard," I snapped, the authority in my voice echoing in the empty room. "I'm a co-owner of this property. You needed my signature to secure that loan. But I didn't sign this, did I? You forged my name. You committed identity theft and wire fraud to steal $60,000. Donovan stumbled backward, hitting the wall, his mouth hanging open. "Dad, what is she talking about? You said the money was from your retirement fund. You forged her signature." "My lawyer, Monica, already has the files," I said, ignoring Donovan's panic and speaking directly to the phone. "The lawsuit is being drafted as we speak. I am pressing criminal charges for identity theft, and I am reporting the fraud to the bank. The loan will be voided in my name, which means you two are solely responsible for $60,000 you don't have. The bank is going to take this house, Richard. You tried to throw me out? Congratulations. You just made yourselves homeless. Valerie, please, sweetheart, let's just talk about this like a family. Nancy's voice suddenly shrieked through the phone, crying hysterically in the background. The mask had completely slipped. They were terrified. I looked at Donovan, who was sliding down the wall, clutching his head in his hands, realizing his golden ticket was actually a prison sentence. I looked at Walter, who gave me a silent, respectful nod. We aren't family, I said coldly to the phone. You have 24 hours to figure out your own lives. I hung up the call. I tossed the folder onto Donovan's lap, turned around, and walked out the front door, leaving them to rot in the empty shell of their own making. The next few weeks were a masterclass in watching a toxic ecosystem eat itself alive. I moved into a beautiful, spacious apartment in downtown Missoula, overlooking the Clark Fork River. The massive gray sectional sofa fit perfectly in the living room, bathed in natural sunlight. Every piece of furniture, every appliance I had rescued from that house, found a new, peaceful purpose in my space. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was breathing clean air. But while I was arranging flowers on my dining table, my parents' world was going up in flames. On Monday morning, exactly as promised, I sat in Monica's sleek downtown law office. She had drafted a devastating, ironclad lawsuit. We filed a formal police report for identity theft and submitted the forged loan documents directly to the bank's fraud investigation department. The fallout was nuclear. My phone became a battlefield of desperate, chaotic voicemails. At first, Richard tried to maintain his tyrannical dominance. You withdraw this nonsense immediately, Valerie. You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding, he bellowed in one message. When that didn't work, Nancy took over, utilizing her weaponized tears. How can you do this to your own mother? We raised you. We made a mistake, but sending us to jail? You're a monster. Donovan's voicemails were the most pathetic. He swung wildly between threatening to sue me for defamation and begging me for a loan so he could flee the state. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't reply to a single text. I listened to their desperate spiraling while sipping my morning coffee, and then I systematically blocked every single number associated with them. I cut the cord completely. The legal mechanics worked swiftly, fueled by the undeniable physical evidence. The bank's fraud department confirmed that the signature was a blatant forgery. Because I was a co-owner who had never consented to the lien, the bank legally had to void my liability. However, they didn't just forgive the debt. The $60,000 had already been spent by Donovan. The bank immediately called the loan in full, demanding immediate repayment from Richard and Nancy. Since they had zero savings and terrible credit, they defaulted instantly. Monica handled all the communications, shielding me from the radioactive fallout. She called me one afternoon, sounding incredibly satisfied. It's done, Val, she said. The bank has officially initiated foreclosure proceedings against your parents. Because of the fraud, they expedited the process. They're seizing the property. I stood by the window of my new apartment, looking out at the river reflecting the afternoon sun. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It wasn't sadness, and it wasn't guilt. It was the absolute finality of it all. The house I had bled for, the house I had drained my savings to protect 3 years ago, was going back to the bank. But this time, I wasn't going to step in. I wasn't going to write a check. The hero complex was dead. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and I had simply pulled out the bottom card. 6 months later, the dust had fully settled on the ruins of my former family. The legal system had chewed them up and spit them out. We never actually went to a dramatic criminal trial. Faced with undeniable proof of wire fraud and forgery, my parents' cheap public defender begged for a plea deal to keep them out of federal prison. They were slapped with massive fines, years of strict probation, and a permanent felony record that destroyed whatever microscopic credibility they had left. The house, the battleground of my entire life, was seized by the bank and sold at auction for pennies on the dollar. I heard through the incredibly efficient Missoula gossip mill that Richard and Nancy were given exactly 7 days to vacate the premises by the county sheriff. Without my furniture, without my financial support, and utterly bankrupt from the legal fees, they had nowhere to go. They ended up renting a dingy, cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a run-down complex on the far outskirts of town, right next to a noisy freight train track. Donovan's fate was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. The golden boy, the imaginary Wall Street titan, was dragged down into the mud with them. Because his name was also tied to the fraudulent receipt of the funds, his credit was permanently nuked. Unable to secure a lease anywhere, he was forced to sleep on a lumpy futon in the living room of our parents' cramped apartment. The tension in that tiny space must have been suffocating. I actually saw him once, entirely by accident. I was driving across town to meet a client and stopped at a local handwash car detailing business. Through my windshield, I saw a guy in soaking wet, soapy overalls. Their social standing in the community was equally pulverized. Missoula is a small city, but it operates like a tight-knit small town. Everyone knew what they had done. Sylvia and Walter had made sure the truth circulated. My parents were ostracized from their church group. Nancy was unceremoniously kicked out of her book club. When they went to the local grocery store, people would actively turn their shopping carts around in the aisles to avoid making eye contact with them. They had spent their entire lives bragging to the neighbors about their superiority, and now they were nothing but a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. They had sacrificed their loyal daughter to worship a false idol, and the idol had dragged them down to the bottom of the ocean. Today, exactly 1 year after that fateful family dinner, my life is unrecognizable. My interior design business, Hayes Concepts, is absolutely booming. Without the massive anchor of my family's financial crises dragging me down, I was finally able to invest in my own marketing and take on massive commercial projects. I recently hired 2 junior designers to help manage the workload. I bought a brand new car, my credit score is flawless, and my bank account is healthier than it has ever been. I'm sitting on that same gray sectional sofa right now, drinking a glass of expensive wine, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The apartment is quiet, but it's a warm, comforting quiet. It's not the tense, suffocating silence of waiting for the next disaster to strike. It's the silence of true peace. Sometimes, I look back at the girl I was 3 years ago, the exhausted, desperate 27-year-old who emptied her entire life savings to save a family that didn't respect her. I don't hate her. I pity her. She was suffering from a terminal case of family guilt. Society conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, that you must forgive your family no matter what they do to you, because family is family. But I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing if it lacks respect, loyalty, and basic human decency. Being related to someone does not give them a free pass to abuse you, manipulate you, or steal your identity. My parents didn't love me. They loved what I could provide for them. Donovan didn't love them. He loved the ATM they represented. I had to become the villain in their story to become the hero in my own. I had to rip the Band-Aid off, strip the house to the bone, and let the law crush them, because it was the only way I was ever going to survive. I cut the infected branch off the tree, and for the first time in my life, I am finally growing. Looking back, my relatives keep messaging me through fake accounts, calling me a monster for leaving my aging parents and brother homeless on the streets. They say family is blood and I should have just taken the hit. So, I have to ask you guys. Am I wrong for destroying my family to protect myself, or should I have forgiven them for the sake of family? Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you won't miss any of our upcoming daily drama stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. See you in the next video.